Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 35 of 2020. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow us on Twitter at The Odds Breakers. Follow us on social media /The Odds Breakers. This episode is being sponsored by mybookie.ag for a 50% sign-up bonus. Please visit MyBookie and use the promo code The Odds Breakers. Terms and conditions and location apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs and sponsor the podcast and website, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member for $17.99 a month. You can get my plays and premium plays before the line moves. If nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. I'm back from vacation, my friends, and it was fun. Had a great trip with my family. Flew up to Wisconsin, drove to Minocqua. We have an old family cabin there that we packed in, did some boating, did some fishing. My kids caught fish. They rode the old Sea-Doo from 1994. Just had an absolute blast. Went back to Madison with the kids. Did some more boating on Lake Monona. Just had a fantastic 4th of July. I tell you, it was a great time, but it was also exhausting because I have 3 young kids, and one of them happens to be 17 months old. So you can imagine that. But was able to see a lot of friends. Definitely had a few beers, a couple bonfires, and came back on Monday night refreshed and recharged and ready to dive right in to sports betting because that's what I love to do. And I feel this year is going to be another good year coming on because I just cannot wait for a little bit of hockey, a little bit of baseball, and right around the corner, we're going to get some form of football. I am also extremely excited to finally bring on a guest that has been a trailblazer in the sports betting and podcasting world that we all now love. His name is Adam Burke from bangthebook.com, and we're going to discuss the baseball season of 2020. Speaking of the upcoming seasons, if you're a handicapper and you'd like to get your name out there a little bit, please feel free to contact us at the Odds Breakers and see if we're able to get you in some articles where you can give out some great content and maybe some free plays to our subscribers as well as our listeners. Before we get into our guests, while I was gone, it looks like Cam Newton has now joined the Patriots, and I believe we took their season win total under 9. And now Cam Newton's on the Patriots. But I just looked, and the season win total is still at 9. It's a little bit more juiced. I think it's like minus 120 now. Not much of a difference, so it doesn't look like Vegas thinks it's going to make a huge difference. I have noticed in one of the books that the futures market on the Patriots is both the same with the Bills right now at plus 130 to win the division. So he did move that one a little bit, but in my opinion, still a huge uphill battle when he hasn't taken any reps with this team. He joined so late, and the Patriots have the hardest schedule in the division, being that they took first place last year. So in my opinion, it's still a good time to fade this team. As you know, we love our listeners, and we have a listener question from Cade Kral at CCRALL4. It's a really good question because it has to do with the Big Ten, and you know how much I love the Big Ten. We have an Iowa fan here, says that he was questioning my thoughts on Iowa. I believe my wins were 7. and he did some research, saw that Marset, Smith, Tracy, Reggiani, and Laporta, which is their tight end, most of those are receivers, by the way, they combined for 80% of Stanley's yards last season, and they all return. Do you think they have a realistic shot at passing 7.5 wins? Obviously, he's talking about the QB leaving is a factor, but he thinks that additional offensive tackle, Coy Cronk, to replace Wirfs is an underrated pickup. So he wants to know my opinion on that. So one rule of thumb that I look at here is when a quarterback is switched in college football, especially, right? There's a lot more variance from season to season in college football in general, unless you're Alabama, Ohio State, who always gets 5 stars and has the best coaches, but the rest of the teams, more variance. I rarely ever take the over when there's a new quarterback, and the only time I would be is if maybe they had low expectations or if they had 3 wins, right? I mean, Iowa has always been a pretty good team in the Big Ten West, always a little bit under Wisconsin right there, but the Big Ten West has become stronger, right? So what if this quarterback's terrible? You think about Northwestern last year, they won 3 games, and the year before that, they won the Big Ten West and played Ohio State and got their butts kicked. 1 year later, they have a new quarterback. He was actually really hyped up. He was transferred in, I believe, from Clemson. His name was Hunter Johnson, and he did a terrible job, lost his position to Green, and they literally went 3-9. And it's not like they lost a ton of players that year, too. So that's how much a quarterback can dictate some of these teams. Now you have Spencer Petras coming in for Iowa. The kid's got some size, 6'5", 207. Played at Marin Catholic High School, but he was a 3-star recruit. It's not like he was a 5-star or a 4-star. So his first year with the limited snaps he had to replace Stanley is the big question mark for me. I can't take the over here. He could be great, though. I mean, great points were made by Cade because a lot of those receivers, Smith, Marset, they did put up a ton of yards, and they have depth at the receiving position. And if their offensive line holds up, the quarterback's going to gain confidence. So there's definitely some upside right there. But look at their schedule. I mean, Iowa has to play Iowa State, right? Their rival, and Iowa State's supposed to be better. They have to go to Minnesota this year. They have to play Michigan State, that at Ohio State, then at Penn State, all back-to-back here. They have to play Nebraska at home, and that's not a cakewalk. They're going to go to a better Illinois team this year. That's not easy. I mean, they're going to beat Northern Iowa and Northern Illinois, but Iowa State's a big question mark for me. And then, of course, at the very end, when they could be sitting at 7 wins, they're going to play Wisconsin. And are you going to favor them in that game? Because Vegas sure isn't. So their schedule is really tough. The point is, the fact that they have a new quarterback here makes a lot more unpredictability, and that's usually when I stay away. But, Cade, I will tell you, Iowa certainly has some upside if this kid can be good, because he's going to have a good line protecting him, and he's going to have some great receivers to throw to.
But to be the man, you got to beat the man, and I'm saying, woo, right here.
All right, without further ado, let's get on our guest, Mr. Adam Burke from bangthebook.com. And now I am very happy to introduce a man who has been a big influence on me for a very long time. I've been following and listening to Adam for many years. You know him from his fantastic content as a writer and podcast host over at Bang the Book. I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Adam Burke from bangthebook.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Skating Tripods. Adam, looks like we're finally going to get some sports back in this crazy world. Let's hope so anyway. How's your summer been treating you?
It's been unique, to say the least. I mean, a lot more emphasis on golf and NASCAR and Korean baseball and just trying to find things to keep busy. But, I guess all in all, I mean, I I can't complain too much, certainly relative to some of the hardships that some other people out there are facing here.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw how you have just kind of grinded through the KBO league. A lot of interesting stuff going on there, and I've never thought about this league so much since I've been listening to your podcast here. But it's a great way to diversify and find something to do. And you guys have always done such a great job at Bang the Book over there, and it's just so cool to hear how you're staying positive and getting through this. As for me, I've been focusing a lot on the future of the football seasons when it comes to college and the NFL. So hopefully those come into fruition as well. But I know you're a big baseball fan. I know this because I've been listening to you all these years. How did you start loving baseball? And this can go even back to when you were a kid, and then kind of tell how that has gotten into your love for sports betting.
Well, it was pretty easy to get into baseball as a kid because I grew up in the Cleveland area, and in the mid '90s, the Indians were awesome. It's probably the best lineup to never win a World Series. Those '95, '96, '97, '98, and even '99 teams. They just didn't have the pitching. Obviously they came within a couple of outs there against the Marlins in '97, but it was very easy to fall in love with baseball as a kid growing up in Cleveland. And furthermore, too. The Browns were gone. Art Modell up and took the Browns, to Baltimore. They became the Baltimore Ravens. The Cavs at that point in time were kind of up and down. I was never really a big basketball fan, big hockey fan, but we never had an NHL team when I was growing up. We just had an IHL team, the Cleveland Lumberjacks, and then following that, the Cleveland Barons of the American Hockey League. So, I've always been a hockey fan, but baseball, it was that top level. It was MLB. It was games really do matter. And it didn't hurt that there were a lot of personalities on those teams, some very, very good teams, Hall of Fame caliber players. Manny Ramirez, my favorite player growing up. Mm-hmm. So it was just easy, to get into baseball, played a lot of catch as a kid, a lot of wiffle ball as a kid, a lot of trips to the batting cages as a kid. And, it's just something that kind of continued to grow for me to the point where, once I got into high school and kind of my first year or two of college, that's when I started digging into sabermetrics and looking more at the data side of the game. And then that's sort of how I wound up parlaying my love of baseball into my love of sports betting.
Interesting. So it is baseball that got you started into sports betting, not any other sport too. So,
well, that and my sophomore year roommate at the University of Akron got me into it. Had a Bodog account, and I lived on ramen and cheap pizza for a while, trying to kind of build up a bankroll, and failed miserably at that, as so many of us do starting out. Playing those 3-line $5 parlays with 3 college basketball games when I didn't know the value of a line, didn't know how to read the market. I was just kind of flying from the seat of my pants, I guess. But it kind of evolved into something more than that. But I've always been a sports fan. It's always been something that I've enjoyed, a variety of different sports. And, once I started to look at things from more of a data standpoint, it just sort of felt like a perfect mesh of loving sports, but also being able to dig into the numbers of sports.
Yeah, you've always been very analytical from what I hear from your podcasts. You like to quantify things. I think I'm that way as well. I always have numbers, I have functions and formulas, and I like putting that kind of work into it. I think a lot of people handicap, more of an artsy way of doing it, maybe kind of looking at spots and situations and things like that. And I don't discredit that at all. I think you definitely have to factor that in. But I love getting to the nitty gritty, trying to predict an actual score. And I'd learned that over the years as well. But your talk about sabermetrics and how you apply that from your podcast at Bang the Book is absolutely fascinating to me. And I do want to get into that here in a little bit. Before that, can you tell us a little bit about your Major League Baseball 2020 preview? And does some of the same concepts that you wrote this huge betting guide, do those concepts still apply to this season?
Yeah, I think so to a degree. I mean, obviously it's an extremely unique season in so many ways here with everything that's gone on. You mentioned kind of asking how things have gone over the summer. Admittedly, that was very difficult to me to write over 100,000 words prepping for the 2020 season and then to not get it. And I've kind of been even a little bit gun shy to start all my football preparations just because I don't want to put a ton of work into it and then have everything kind of fall apart here. But that was something early on in this process that was very difficult for me. Not even just, the fact that it's a shortened season, but wondering if we were going to have a season in general. And now as I'm kind of looking at this 60-game sprint and, being someone very well-versed in analytics and sabermetrics and, being a big proponent of sample size, the sample size is going to be dramatically smaller. Starting pitchers are going to go from 30 to 32 starts to 10 to 12 starts. Mm-hmm. So, how much predictive value is there in 10 to 12 starts that are subject to a lot of variance? So I've been wrestling with that quite a bit here. Unfortunately, I've still got about 2.5 more weeks or so to sort of figure out how much I want to carry over from that full season preview to what we've got coming up. One thing I do think I can carry over is that at this point, a lot of the transactions had already taken place. So the teams that we expected to see on opening day back in March are the teams that we are most likely going to see now, with the exception of, maybe some prospects that wind up playing because there's no minor league season, stuff like that. So at least I know the personnel, and I have an idea of the teams that I liked going into the full season. And if I like them going into the full season, I should probably like them going into this abbreviated season too, because I was looking at a lot of positive variance, a lot of positive results for those teams. So in this smaller sample size, maybe those are teams that can overachieve even more than people originally thought. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, looking at teams like the Diamondbacks that I like the Blue Jays that I started to like later in the process, like fading the Phillies, who I just don't think are a very good team. These are all things that I'm kind of wrestling with right now, but again, because the personnel was pretty much set in stone, I know what we're working with. I just have to decide how that translates to a 60-game sprint.
Absolutely. And that's the question number one in my mind as well, is are these pitchers going to kind of go more innings now? Possibly. Are they going to pitch possibly a complete game if they need to? If it's a low score? I don't know. It's a great question. And you wonder how that fatigue factor is going to be played. There's not going to be much of a lull in the season. I think after 20 or 30 games, every game is going to count here, because there's not that 162 games where you can make up a lot of games at the end here. It's just kind of, there literally could be a 1-game difference coming to the end between the division winners and either not making the wild card or possibly making the wild card, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And, just to throw out a couple of examples here, I mean, a team like the Detroit Tigers, going into a full season, you kind of look at them and say, okay, this is a roster in a state of flux. They've got some very expensive contracts that they've either already moved or are going to be coming off the books, like a guy like Jordan Zimmerman, for example, who's a free agent after this year. Well, the Tigers were going to have some decisions to make once summertime rolled around. Do we overhaul the rotation and call up Casey Mize? Do we call up Matt Manning? Do we maybe use Tarek Skubal or Alex Fado? Something like that. Well, now I think for Detroit, they have to make that decision very early in the process now, because this is 60 games. So over the course of the entire season, maybe Jordan Zimmerman throws 150 or 160 below average innings. Maybe Ivan Nova does the same thing, throws 160 below average innings. Now for the Tigers, they may opt to take Zimmerman or Daniel Norris or Nova out of the rotation and plug in some of these younger guys, maybe do some piggybacks with these guys. That's the type of thing that I think can improve a team's ceiling, can give them a lot more potential. So instead of trying to figure out what that breaking point would be over a full season of when they call those guys up, maybe from the jump, the Tigers go, you know what? We don't get 140 minor league innings to develop these guys this year. Let's go ahead and develop on the fly, some on-the-job training. Maybe the Tigers wind up being a little bit better of a team. Maybe the Toronto Blue Jays, with their young offense that would have been very streaky over the course of a full season, maybe in a smaller sample size here, Kevin Biggio, Bo Bichette, Vladdy Jr., Lourdes Gurriel Jr., maybe all those guys rake at once, and all of a sudden you've got a team that maybe over 162 games wins 78, 77, something like that. but maybe over 60 games, they can go 35-25 because they've got this high upside, high octane offense. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of looking at here, is that maybe some of the younger teams that will take a more aggressive mindset could really benefit here over the teams that are forced to keep status quo, to keep veterans or potential free agents happy.
100%. Great points there. I absolutely agree. These younger teams might be worth a larger shot here, just because they happen to go on a run. They will be in the race, which also might mean there could be some less, so-called tanking, towards the end of the year, like we used to see in August and September. So it almost great concept, huh? These teams might just try a little bit harder up to the end, Adam.
Yeah, and who knows, and also, too, another obvious question here is that, let's say you are a team where you expected to contend, and I think the Boston Red Sox would be a really good example of this here. I know they traded away Mookie Betts and David Price. They're trying to save money, which is just mind-blowing to me that the Boston Red Sox need to save money. But this is now a team where you kind of start looking down the line a little bit here. If they're a team that's 15-25, I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but 18-22, something like that after 40 games, do you start looking at maybe shutting down an Eduardo Rodriguez who already might not be ready for the season? Do you start looking at maybe giving more plate appearances to a guy like Michael Chavis? Do you start, maybe moving some guys around the lineup, stuff like that, moving some guys in and out of the starting rotation? Because you're behind the Yankees now. You're behind the Tampa Bay Rays now. And if you don't get your act together, you're behind the Toronto Blue Jays now. So for a team like Boston that was trying to contend kind of on the fly with this partial rebuild that they were doing, if they get off to a bad start, does the bottom just totally fall out for a team like that? Philadelphia, same thing. I didn't like them coming into the season anyway. I didn't think they were a very deep team, probably have the worst bullpen in the National League, certainly in the National League East. If things are bad for them at the outset, again, their mindset changes of maybe some of their young pitchers get to go every fifth day in place of somebody who's kind of a fringy starter, something like that. So it's very hard to try and figure out this futures market here, in part because we don't know if we're going to play a full season, but also because these teams will have different philosophies for opening day than they will 20 games in, than they will 40 games in. So there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of uncertainties. And, you talked about being more of an analytics-minded guy yourself. The reason we like data is because it's there. It's in front of us. It's tangible. A lot of intangibles for this MLB season, gray areas, unknowns, stuff like that, that I think really, in some respects, can create a pretty good betting environment, because a lot of us try to prey on variance, try to be on the right side of that. But also, it's going to be just so unique of an atmosphere and an environment for Major League Baseball that I don't know how much I want to get involved. I also don't know if I'll be able to stay away.
Well, exactly. I am very analytical, and I try to stay away from more of the unknown. And that's what we're getting here, is a lot more unknown here. But of course, before the season started, I did invest a little bit in some futures. I believe I took the Rays to win the division at 5-1. I took a small shot, the Diamondbacks at 9-1. I just thought there was too much value at the plus 900 there. And the Angels at 6.5-1. I looked this morning, and it looked like I got a little up on a couple of those teams. It looks like my odds improved here compared to what the Rays and the Diamondbacks are now. But I'm not sure if I would take any futures right now. I'm stuck with these. But do you have any thoughts on taking any of these teams?
I think it's a challenge. I mean, one thing that this smaller schedule does provide is an opportunity for a higher variance team like the San Diego Padres, for example, to maybe just go on a run. And I think the Padres have the best bullpen in the National League, maybe the best bullpen in all of baseball. And I think that will be a primary sticking point for me heading into the season. The teams that have great bullpen depth are going to have a lot of success in this format, I think. One of the reasons why I love Tampa Bay for the full season, one of the reasons why I love Tampa Bay for this abbreviated season too, is that, let's say that Kirby Yates, knock on wood, let's hope this doesn't happen. Kirby Yates gets a coronavirus positive or hurts an oblique or some sort of elbow discomfort, something like that. For a team that's top heavy in the bullpen, that's a death sentence because you're losing a primary reliever. You're already shuffling guys around, stuff like that. For a team like the Padres or a team like the Rays, you've got a lot of options. They're just tremendous depth. Their 6th and 7th guys are primary setup guys and closers for other teams. So those are teams that can withstand injuries in this short format. They also both have pretty good starting rotations too. But I think that's something that's going to be really important to look at. Teams with bullpen strength. So I like the Rays. I like the Padres. I think the Twins win the Central, and I don't know if they have a whole lot of trouble doing that in the American League. I think a team like the Mets could be really interesting because they've got a lot of different starting pitching arms that they could possibly move to the bullpen and sort of, supplement that group a little bit, complement some of their back end guys. So, again, it's just right now it's tough because my head is everywhere. With 2 weeks left until the start of the season, I have all these different thoughts floating through my mind of how this is going to go, assuming that this actually gets played. And at some point, I've got to come to some concrete decisions and say, I'm going to take a shot with this future. I'm not going to take a shot with this future, stuff like that. Just not knowing what happens with injuries, what happens with COVID, what happens with, just teams that get hot versus teams that don't. It's, again, it's a very challenging environment to try and handicap, but it's what we try to do, right? We want to try to overcome challenges. And really, this business is about solving puzzles, I think. And we've got some of the most difficult puzzles we've ever seen for this baseball season. Absolutely.
Great points there on the bullpen because you don't have the games to make up if one of your long reliever or short relievers there, 7th inning, 8th inning gets hurt, right? And so if that happens, it could get you on a slide, which you're never going to make that up. So that might even shift a team like the Red Sox or somebody like that to try bringing up some of their minor leaguers early, right? Great points on that, Adam. Fantastic. And that's going to get me thinking a lot more too, because these next 2.5 weeks, I'm going to be racking my brain just like I'm sure you will. Well, let's switch a little bit, move to a little bit of some handicapping techniques here. The next question I have, what are some of your favorite sites that are free to the public that you like to use to handicap baseball?
Yeah, the preeminent one is Fangraphs. Fangraphs has all of the advanced metrics that are out there and, all the different player pages and the level of content has gone down a little bit. They've just had such a massive brain drain of some of their writers, like an August Fagerstrom, who works in the Brewers front office. Jeff Sullivan took a front office position. David Cameron, of course, with the Padres. They've had kind of a brain drain here of late, but they still have some pretty good writers over there. Few guys break down pitchers better than Paul Sporer, for example. Jeff Zimmerman is very, very good. Their community articles are actually quite good too. But a lot of people use the player pages, and that's certainly something that I use as well to kind of break down these guys statistically. Another one that I love is baseballsavant.com, which is actually the home of StatCast data, MLB Advanced Media, on the internet, and that's Darren Willman, Tom Tango, Mike Petrello is a big guy with StatCast as well. One of the things that I've tried to use here in terms of trying to adapt to what's happened in the market, a lot of people know of the basic sabermetric concepts and move lines as a result. So I've tried to look a little bit more at things like contact management, at things like barrel rates and stuff like that, trying to, put myself into a position where I look at a pitcher and I say, this guy induces a lot of weak contact. So it's harder for him to get knocked around than it is a pitcher that induces a lot of hard contact, because hard contact leads to doubles, leads to home runs, stuff like that, leads to harder plays for the defense to make. So I've tried to look more at contact management, because we've always kind of thought, and even, earlier in the 2010s, we always thought that once the ball left the pitcher's hand, he didn't have a whole lot of control over what happened. And maybe that is the case, but we're seeing, based on exit velocities, launch angles, barrel rates, stuff like that, that pitchers do have more control over balls in play than we thought, just simply by the way that they pitch, by the command that they exhibit. So I've tried to use that a lot more in my handicapping to where, it helps me isolate positive and negative regression candidates. And it also helps me maybe find some undervalued pitchers that maybe don't have the numbers, but largely based on sequencing or variance, something like that, as opposed to things that they're doing wrong.
That's great. And one example would be a fly ball pitcher on a day the wind is blowing in. People would look at that and possibly even go to an under bet, if not even favoring that team, depending upon the money line of that game. So great stuff there. I never thought before, I would say before the last couple of years here, that pitchers had this much control. But the way they set up a batter, when there's a double play possibility, they might have a little bit more control of that double play and a ground ball happening. So great stuff there. You just talked about sabermetrics coming from Fangraphs, and I've used that site. Why don't you tell our listeners if or how you can incorporate stats like FIP, XFIP, or BABIP when looking for a value in a game?
Yeah, when you look at a statistic like FIP, which stands for fielder independent pitching, it's predicated on the things that a pitcher can control: strikeouts, walks, hit by pitches, and home runs. The idea is that, you're kind of taking the defense out of the equation. You're kind of taking batted ball luck and sequencing and stuff like that out of the equation. So it's kind of a better way of evaluating a pitcher on his skill set. It takes away a lot of the context. It takes away a lot of the, the things that aren't really related to him. A fielder gets to a ball or doesn't. A fielder makes a play or doesn't. So FIP is one of those stats that, again, strikeouts and walks are two very important statistics. When you strike a batter out, there is a 0% chance that he gets a hit. When you walk a batter, there's a 100% chance that he gets on base. When you give up a home run, that is a 100%, outcome of giving up a run, at least one run. Right. So the idea behind FIP is that you're sort of isolating a pitcher's talent level as opposed to all of the external factors that can impact the game and impact his statistics. A stat like XFIP, for example, is fielder independent pitching, but it regresses a pitcher's home run rate to the league average of home run to fly ball percentage. Now, this is a stat that actually has gotten very skewed over the last few years with the juiced ball and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily a statistic I've looked at as much here recently. But with FIP and XFIP, you try to use them as indicators of positive or negative regression. A high ERA and a lower FIP would suggest that pitcher has gotten unlucky, or that maybe his defense just isn't very good behind him. A low ERA and a high FIP would suggest that pitcher has gotten lucky. He's not striking out a lot of batters. He's issuing too many walks. He's giving up too many home runs, but he's getting lucky that they're solo home runs or that those walks have been stranded on base, stuff like that. So when you look at these numbers, you sort of try to picture in your mind, what does it look like if this guy improves in this start or in this string of starts? And that's what we're always trying to do. We're always trying to get ahead of the market in some way, whether it's on an individual or on a price, something like that. We try to find these indicators where we think guys are in line to improve or regress. And that's a lot of the handicapping that I try to use with incorporating the data, is trying to bet on those guys that look like they're in line for some improvement and bet against or avoid those guys that look like things could get worse for them.
Great call. Yeah, absolutely. That's something I look at. If there's a difference between just like you mentioned, ERA and FIP, you ask yourself why. Is there a reason that like their defense could be that bad when you look at their defensive efficiency ratio or DER? You can kind of incorporate that and say, well, this team's defense isn't so bad. It might be some bad luck. The pitcher has a very low FIP. The ERA is high. I can see some regression back to the mean and possibly find some value on the money line. So great stuff there. That's exactly how people should be using sabermetrics to handicap their games. Sometimes I find myself, Adam, spending a little too much time per game. I don't know about you, but I'll sit there and over handicap. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, it happens all the time. I mean, again, with baseball, I mean, there's a lot of data out there. With NFL, a lot of it is behind a paywall. A lot of it is at places, like Pro Football Focus and some of the other places that are out there that, not to say that those aren't good investments, but a lot of the baseball statistics, and particularly the advanced statistics, are out there for free. So we've got a lot of resources at our disposal. And without a doubt, I will sit there and deep dive so far into a game that all of a sudden I look at the clock and I can't fathom how I spent that much time breaking down that game. But it's what I try to do to get an edge. It's what I try to do to get out there and maybe find something that the market hasn't really picked up on. And the markets know about sabermetrics now. And I think to a degree, the odds makers and the risk managers have an idea too. They have an idea at least of where they expect the money to come in on a game. But they're not looking at things like contact management. They're not looking at things like exit velocities and barrel rates. They're not looking as in-depth at park factors as I tend to look based on some of the StatCast data. So I try to use that stuff not only as justification for the plays and for the content that I write over at bangthebook.com, but to try and find something that is an edge that maybe other people aren't looking at, to where maybe I find an undervalued commodity, or maybe I find that a pitcher is overvalued, something like that. Or I use some of this advanced data to look for injury indicators. Is a pitcher's velocity down? Is a pitcher's spin rate down, which is a really good indicator of some sort of injury, or at the very least, some sort of mechanical problem. I'm not going to bet on a guy who I think is hurt or has a mechanical issue. I will fade that guy or look to stay away. And I don't know if it's necessarily translated into as many winners as I would hope, but it certainly kept me off of some losers, and that's also a pretty important part of the handicapping process.
Absolutely. And it takes that amount of time sometimes to find that extra edge. And sometimes you find it, before the sports betting sharps or public can pick up on that, or when the bookmakers themselves before you pick up on it. So, there's a lot of things that you've heard about over the years that a bookmaker will finally pick up on and realize that he's getting beat that way. So it's great to find new ways of doing it. So I love how you throw some of those new things out, like barrel rate, and just exit velocity off the bat, to tell if there's an actual reason that this line could be a little bit right or a little bit off. So great stuff there. And that's a great segue into my next question. Always wondered if the sports books use sabermetrics with baseball. I've gotten mixed answers before. You're probably a great person to ask that. I know a lot of times books will, throw out small lines using their own formulas or functions, and then kind of let the market do it figure out the line before they raise their limits. What do you think about sports books looking at some of this?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting discussion. And in fact, I heard once from a pretty prominent, now former odds maker that, we probably overcomplicate the process in terms of what actually goes into, trying to set a line, trying to sort of figure out where the right place to go is. Major League Baseball is a very difficult market because you do have the low limits on the overnights, which is when, a lot of the sabermetrically inclined people kind of attack the market. But you also wind up having a lot of scalping and a lot of buying back and a lot of middling and stuff like that. So, the books just kind of have to always be vigilant in terms of balancing their counts and, just trying to accommodate what's going on in the marketplace as far as action goes. So for the most part, I think they pretty much leave the sabermetrics up to us and just sort of let us kind of handicap the game, as we're trying to make money on it. And, they just sort of handicap the action as it comes in. So I think in some respects, they may kind of incorporate it in terms of, having a good idea at the outset of where a line is likely to go, but they don't necessarily know if the line is going to stay going in that direction, what sort of the breaking point is for money to come in the other way, stuff like that. So I think they just kind of leave it up to the market to decide and, try to accommodate, again, like I said, people trying to scalp and middle the money line.
That's right. Yeah. Let us figure out the grind part of it. And then they'll raise their limits once things kind of settle down at a number. So yeah, that's kind of what I figured, and sabermetrics, is great for the handicapper, and it's great when you attack early lines. As I always say, it's always, especially if you're not betting high limits and you're just having some fun, like most of our listeners do, try to hit the lines as early as possible, because I think that's where you're going to find most of your value. So into my next question, without going into crazy detail, how do you go by your process of handicapping your baseball when the lines come up?
So basically, what I do, obviously a lot of it, and this is going to be unique this season as well too, is that a lot of the lines are predicated on the starting pitching matchup. And this year we're going to have multiple scenarios where maybe the starters only go 3 innings. Maybe the starters only go 4 innings, stuff like that. But the usual starting point for me is, to break down the starting pitchers and just first look for the obvious signs of regression, sort of looking at the ERA, FIP, and xFIP discrepancies, kind of looking at, BABIP, batting average on balls in play. If it's too high, it's probably going to come down. Why is it too high? Is he allowing a lot of hard contact? Does he pitch for a bad defensive team? Stuff like that. Very basic, sabermetric handicapping of the starting pitchers. Then I start to look at the matchup specifically, because a lot of pitchers, have platoon splits. A lot of guys that throw right-handed struggle with lefties. A lot of guys that throw left-handed struggle with righties. How well equipped is that opposing offense to take advantage of that platoon split? Are they going to, more often than not, have success in that matchup? Then you also have to take a look not just at bullpens and not just at the bullpen personnel, but the usage of the bullpens. And this will be critically important this year without a spring training, without guys having the opportunity, to get really stretched out. Pitchers work or relievers working back-to-back days that if they pitch in that game would pitch a third day. Have they already pitched 3 games in 4 days? A lot of managers shy away from using a guy 4 games in 5 days unless he's, lefty matchup guy or something like that. And now with the 3-batter rule, that could change a little bit in terms of bullpen usage as well. So those are really the 3 basic tenets that I kind of look at, is the starting pitcher, the matchup against the opposing offense, and kind of what the status of the bullpen is. And I will, deeper dive from there in terms of, like we talked about, with looking at contact management, looking at the park factor. If he's a ground ball guy and he's pitching in a ballpark where the infield is usually cut low, or it's a sun-baked infield where the ball speeds up a little bit, well, that's probably going to hurt, his batting average against. More base runners, more opportunities for the opposition, stuff like that. So it's just sort of a process that, really I kind of write myself through, because I write a daily article over at bangthebook.com talking about all of these different matchup elements, and I can organize my thoughts that way by, putting not pen to paper in this day and age, but, putting my fingers to the keyboard and just kind of organizing and processing my thoughts that way, and then sort of evaluating what I've handicapped, what means more to me than something else.
Do you actually come up with a number on a game yourself? And I guess another question would be, what do the books use for home field advantage?
I don't come up with a number myself. I really leave that to the modeling crowd. They are far, far smarter than me, far superior to me. Those are the people that, know where these things should be lined, know what, pretty good ranges. So I don't come up with my own numbers. I have an idea of when I think something looks off, and pretty dramatically off. But with that being said, I leave that up to the modeling crowd. As far as home field advantage goes, that's a really good question, because what constitutes home field advantage in baseball? Is it the fan element? Is it the park factor elements? Because when you think about the NFL, for example, yeah, you've got the 12th man in Seattle, and Kansas City's a tough place to play, and Green Bay or New England when it's really cold, stuff like that. But all of those stadiums are pretty much the same. They're all laid out in a similar manner. There's no park factor in the NFL. There's a home field advantage with the crowd, maybe, but there's no real park factor. I guess you could, throw in domes and maybe kickers having more success, stuff like that. But in Major League Baseball, when you play 81 of your 162 games in the same ballpark, you tailor your team, you tailor your offense, you tailor your pitching staff towards that environment that you're in. So I don't know what a baseline home field advantage would be. Maybe 20 or 25 cents is kind of the baseline I would sort of think, just in terms of analyzing the market. But I think some are higher and some are quite a bit lower, depending on the composition of the team.
Yeah, and I'm glad you answered it like that, because I've been flustered over it myself. I mean, you can look at Colorado. When people play there, it's a hitter's park. What's a good home field advantage if a team has a very high exit velocity going into that park, right? So it's just another concept that maybe Colorado wouldn't have an advantage as much, except the crowd itself, I suppose, when a team comes in there, they can really smack the ball around. So great stuff there. Weather, of course, is...
And I think specifically, too, here, Kiev, sorry to interrupt you, but in this format here, where, now you're playing 40 of your 60 games against teams within your division, park factors are really magnified. I mean, 2/3 of your games are going to be division games. So if you're a good offensive team in a good pitching division, that's a tough road to hoe for you. Meanwhile, if you're a good pitching team, but you're going to play in a bunch of really good hitters parks, that's a problem too. So that's something I'm looking at here, to where I think maybe this year, oddly enough, with no fans in most of these ballparks, home field advantage may matter a little bit more, just because of the distribution of the schedule and the fact that, maybe some teams just won't fit as well in some of these ballparks they'll be playing in. A team like Colorado, for example, in their 30 home games, they'll be just fine, but it'll also elevate the opposition offense. Their road games, Minute Maid Park, when the roof is closed in Houston, that's a pitcher's park. Seattle's a pitcher's park. The new park in Texas is supposed to be, a little bit more of a pitcher-friendly park. Oakland for pitchers, Anaheim for pitchers, San Diego, San Francisco, those are both pitchers' parks. I think it's challenging for a team like Colorado that already struggles on the road anyway to now go into these poor hitting environments with a bad pitching staff. So I think in Colorado games, maybe that so-called Coors Field factor when they go on the road is magnified even more here, just because of the road parks they have to play in.
Great stuff. Absolutely. And that's a ton to think about for this coming season. A lot of content there. Thank you so much. And I do want to say that I myself have tried to come up with numbers, exact numbers in baseball, and my functions got longer and longer and longer until I literally drove myself nuts. And I just instead try to use some of the same concepts that you do, looking for variations with some of the sabermetrics, possibly looking at left-handed pitching versus right-handed pitching, how batters and teams bat against that, and just any old trick of the trade I can try to do, before the line moves too much. So great stuff right there. And we destroyed baseball there, Adam. Really appreciate all that information. Just real quick, college football this year, hoping we have a normal season here. Do you think the schedules are going to hold up here? Is it too tough to tell? Or do you think we might have a modified schedule because of this virus?
I mean, I think a modified schedule is a possibility. I think that the smart thing to do probably for college football, and it's really sad that it's going to have to be this way, because this is going to cripple the FCS teams and, some of the lower tier FBS teams. But you may be looking at conference play only. You may have to look at a regionally based schedule, much like what Major League Baseball is doing here, not even necessarily just to limit travel, but to sort of keep these teams in the same pockets of the country, because we're sort of seeing spikes that are kind of connected. They're in certain geographic parts of the country. So at least maybe you've got, I don't even want to say a better opportunity of playing games in some of those hotspot areas, but just, it's difficult for a team like South Carolina, where there have been, prolonged spikes here. It's difficult for them to go on the road and play, a non-conference game somewhere in the Midwest. I don't know what their schedule looks like, but just using that as one example here, teams from Texas going to play at Notre Dame or, USC or something like that, I think that's really challenging. So I think what the goal should be at this point in time, and again, I feel awful for the FCS teams that rely on those paycheck games. You probably have to look at some sort of regional or conference-based schedule and figure out some way for everybody to prop up, the FCS or some of those FBS teams that, just don't have enough money in the coffers.
Yeah, maybe this is one of those years that the NCAA has to have a little bit of a chip in to help some of those FCS and even Group of Five type schools that rely on that kind of thing, Adam. That could be an idea too, kind of everybody pitch in to help each other out. And you wonder if they're going to bring up that model. I don't want to see the players not play when it's been their lifelong dream to play college football. It's very sad, and I really hope that they can figure it out and all kind of share the wealth, if you know what I mean. So, do you want to throw out a play there? Of course, I got to ask this, Adam. Now that I got you on. When it comes to the football season, it could be either college or NFL. I know there's a lot of uncertainty. Is there any team that you might think have some value? Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, on the college football side, it's extremely tough not knowing, which teams are going to play where, if there will even be a season. And, a lot of college athletes have been very outspoken about the Black Lives Matter movement. Will they not feel comfortable playing in this coronavirus environment? And if they don't, how many of their teammates kind of follow suit? Are the coaches fully supportive? All that kind of thing. College football, I think logistically, there's so much to try and figure out here that, I wouldn't touch any college football future at this point in time. As far as the NFL goes, and man, I hate to play the homer card. I hate to sound like I'm doing this, but the Cleveland Browns are just loaded with talent on both sides of the ball. And now with Kevin Stefanski, a guy that, he's said all the right things here with all of his media interviews and all that since he took the job. He's, kind of got that run first mindset, having a guy like Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. That probably helps here with Nick Chubb. They'll do some play action. They'll do some different things with their personnel. I'm not going to say that the Browns win the division because I think Baltimore is still pretty clearly ahead of them. But I think the Browns would be a good bet from a season win total standpoint, would be a good bet in terms of, maybe a playoff future to the point where you could hedge it in that wild card weekend, something like that. But Stefanski seems to get it. And they finally are in a position now where I think all of the analytics that they've adopted in the front office, they can actually put to work because they've got the right coaching staff there. Hugh Jackson was not necessarily the biggest analytics guy. Freddie Kitchens was in way over his head, as we all know. Stefanski seems to get it. And, Baker seems to be buying in a little bit more right now. They've got the skill guys. They've got the pass rushers. They addressed the back seven in the draft and free agency. They addressed the offensive line. A lot of positive upgrades and improvements for the Browns. So, I mean, hey, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if they run down Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, but I think they could be a playoff team for sure. So if you've got a yes/no playoff prop or, kind of looking at their season win total, something like that, I think there's some value in the Browns to kind of meet those expectations that people have kind of heaped on them the last couple of years.
Well, Adam, I totally agree with what you're saying about the Browns. As a matter of fact, I had them finishing second in my AFC North podcast I did a few weeks back. I love Wills, the guy they drafted as their left tackle, and Conklin. What a fantastic signing, from Tennessee there. I think that was the thing that I had a problem with. I'm like, what are you doing signing Odell Beckham when you already got some receivers there and you need to focus on your offensive line? And that kind of went to show that Baker Mayfield was in a little bit of trouble. Now Baker Mayfield is a little less talk and a lot more action, or a little less beer slamming, if you want to say. And I think he's going to grow up a little bit. And I absolutely agree with you. I think the new coach has got a good head on his shoulders there. And this might be the year the Browns do it. And I actually kind of like them for two bets. You can bet them to finish second in the division at 2-1. And you can play them at 6-1 for first. Maybe you put more on the 2-1 bet, and it could be twice the size. But in my opinion, it would be a nice payout if they finish first or second there. And I just do not like what the Steelers have done over the past few years. And Big Ben is going to be coming in there rusty, man. So really love that your thought process on that, and I 100% agree. So, Adam, I've kept you for a long time. I really appreciate all the content that you've given us to think about here. Where could our listeners go and check out your stuff and find your articles?
Well, first and foremost, my apologies here. I probably sound a little bit different from the tail part of the show. A nice middle finger going out to Spectrum for taking my internet out as we were trying to do this here. Second middle finger to coronavirus, since we were supposed to do this, back in March or so.
That's right.
But yeah, you can find me over at bangthebook.com. You can find me on Twitter at Skating Tripods. And, I got to say, you mentioned when we were talking off air before the show that, you've been a long time listener to Bang the Book, and we do have, a pretty loyal base of people that have been with us for a very long time. And, I've gone on podcasts with a couple of them, and I'm very happy to do yours here finally after, all the delays that we've had. But, I got to thank you, man. I mean, it's not about thanking me for coming on your show. I'm very happy to do it. It's a thanks to you for, being a listener, sending in questions when we did the Monday mailbag, being a supporter of not just me, but the guests that we also have on the show. It means the world to me. I mean, that's why I do this. I don't do it to be a professional bettor or, get rich or make a ton of money or anything like that. I do it to try and help people learn and help people educate themselves on this business. And you're doing the same thing. And that's probably the biggest compliment that anybody can pay me, is that, they've listened to my show and have gone on to do this for themselves and sort of, pay it forward and pass that torch on. And that's the biggest compliment that I could possibly receive for my work. So, Kiev and everybody over at Odds Breakers, thank you for that, because the more people that do this, the more people that help everyone out in the business, the better off we should all be.
Adam, that is fantastic. And hearing that just makes me love the sports betting community that we have so much more. We're not trying to hurt anybody out there betting. There is no competition between us. It's always us against the books and trying to consistently learn a changing industry, things that change. Your information is impeccable. What you've told us, it probably blew a lot of people's minds. If you guys need any more information, and Adam does a great job explaining how he kind of gets to a line. He doesn't just throw it out there. He explains the process. Make sure you guys check that out at bangthebook.com. Adam, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being you and doing the great job you've done for all these years.
Thank you so much, man. Anytime you want to have me on, feel free to ask.
All right, that was Adam Burke from bangthebook.com. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Odds Breakers. Please have a safe weekend out there, and remember to go get some winners.